If I Could Change the World. Indochina decolonization 1945 to 1954.
This episode of If I Could Change the World. The countries known today as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos in the 20th century were occupied by French colonists who arrived in the previous century and knew the area as Indochina.
They ruled over the region for around 150 years until just after World War II, where there was unrest in the country of Vietnam, and nationalist parties in the country formed to proclaim independence. One particular figure, Ho Chi Minh, who was initially a leader in the resistance, later formed a Communist Party. This Communist Party would later be involved in a war for independence in the country, and in 1954 the French colony would be defeated. But before we look into France's defeat and how the great Ho Chi Minh changed the world, let's begin by looking into the impact of the French in Indochina.
Oh hey, didn't see that. With the French control of the life of people living in Indochina, there was a slow formation of unrest within Vietnam, as after seeing the French colossal defeat in World War II, they felt as though it was time to separate and become independent from the French in their own country.
Initially, Ho Chi Minh submitted demands of parliamentary representation by Vietnamese people, freedom of speech, and release of political prisoners to the French Versailles Peace Conference that occurred after World War II. When these demands were rejected, civil unrest grew between the Vietnamese people and the French. Nationalist parties in the country were under pressure by the French and couldn't operate, whilst the Communist Party, which up to this point had been hiding during World War II, with leadership by Ho Chi Minh, were able to sort out independence successfully. However, tension between the Viet Minh, who were Ho Chi Minh's Communist army, and the French, once the Communist Party was open to the government, eventually caused an outbreak of violence. This was the basis of the First Indochina War. Years earlier, whilst the Communist Party was in hiding, the Soviet Union and Kuomintang, who were the Chinese nationalists, who followed the same causes as the Viet Minh, assisted them in supplies and training, which had prepared them for this war. Overall, the war lasted 7.5 years. However, eventually, at a place called Dien Bien Phu in northern Vietnam, the French were at their knees, and a final stand battle took place.
The French imperialism on Indochina had a variety of positive and negative effects. Some positive effects on Indochina include that education had a significant improvement whilst under French colonization. Health and sanitation also showed a great improvement, and Indochina modernized in information and technology. Positive impacts for France were that they were able to produce certain goods they wanted in Indochina, and that the economy grew quite significantly as the crops grown in Indochina were mostly for commercial trade rather than subsidiary use. Negative effects of the French colonization of Indochina include the fact that the population of Indochina had little rights and were forced to adopt the new introduced French laws. One example of a new law introduced that burdened the Vietnamese with a complicated taxation system, which included income tax on all wages, polling tax on all adult males, stamp duties on most publications and documents, and imposts on the weighing and measuring of agricultural goods. Economic protectionism heightened the importance of colonial territories, which therefore made trade barriers in Indochina more significant.
The French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 signalled the end of French influence in Indochina. However, it did not end their presence in Indochina. Dien Bien Phu was the last campaign by a European colonial state. France's defeat was at the hands of Viet Minh General Giap. Dien Bien Phu was a town in northwest Vietnam, supporting an old World War II air base built by the Japanese. It is near the Vietnam-Laos border. Dien Bien Phu was surrounded by jungle that had not been secured by the French. 50,000 Viet Minh soldiers surrounded the French, and Viet Minh artillery, based in the jungle, fired on the French for the first time on January 31, 1954. When the Battle of Dien Bien Phu began, the French artillery commander committed suicide as a result of his inability to hit Giap's artillery. Large numbers of anti-aircraft guns were also placed around Dien Bien Phu by the Viet Minh, not allowing the French to resupply themselves on the badly damaged airstrip. By April 22nd, the Viet Minh controlled most of the airfield, making French parachute drops impossible. On the 7th of May 1954, the French garrison at their fortress at Dien Bien Phu finally surrendered to the Viet Minh after 9 months of siege.
Next time, America discovers another country that isn't America.